This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony from the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. No one saw it coming. The room was tense, all eyes on the door, waiting for the next witness, until the back doors swung. Open and in walked Will Smith. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge froze. There was no announcement, no pre-written statement, just Will walking in alone. Until that moment, he had remained silent. His name had been whispered. Through court leaks and headlines tied to a disturbing audio tape too graphic to release. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the betrayal by those he once trusted. Maybe it was hearing that tape behind closed doors. Whatever it was, Will Smith was done hiding. He didn't step forward as a celebrity. He stepped forward as a man who had seen too much and stayed quiet too long. And when he spoke, the courtroom wasn't ready for what came next, because what Will revealed about Diddy, the parties, the manipulation, and the fear wasn't just explosive. It was a warning. The day had begun like any other in the Diddy trial. Reporters murmured among themselves, lawyers huddled in quiet conversation. Then, without warning, Will Smith entered through the side doors. Alone. No entourage, no lawyer. Just him. And in that moment, the entire energy of the room shifted. You could hear a pin drop. Some thought it was a mistake. Others thought it was a stunt. But the look on Will's face, focused, haunted, made it clear this was real. The old Fresh Prince charm was gone. In its place was something raw. The judge raised an eyebrow. Diddy, who had been lounging smugly at the defense table, suddenly sat up straighter. Will walked straight to the witness stand, not looking at anyone, not even at Diddy. "I wasn't asked to come here today," he began. "I asked if I could speak." The judge allowed it. From that moment on, the trial changed. Will spoke, not from a script, not from notes. He spoke from pain. "I've kept a lot inside for a long time," he said. "I've smiled on red carpets, won awards, made movies about honor and strength, but none of that hides what I saw, what I experienced, and who made it happen." He turned, slightly, just enough to face Diddy. "You did." Will described how it all began, like so many Hollywood stories, with an invitation. It came through a mutual contact, someone I'd worked with. It was pitched as a celebration, Diddy's birthday, nothing crazy, just music, networking, a night to unwind. I'd been to events like that, so I didn't think twice. But the moment he arrived, he knew something was wrong. It was this huge mansion in the hills. Black SUVs lined the driveway, security everywhere. The second I walked in, they took my phone. They said it was for privacy, to protect the guests. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like they didn't want anything getting out. He was escorted inside. The lights were dim. The music pulsed low and strange, ambient, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. There weren't any cameras you could see, but there were mirrors everywhere. It felt like someone was always watching. Will said it started with a few drinks and casual conversation. Then Diddy approached him directly. He looked at me and said, "Now you're part of the family," Will recalled. And he smiled, but it wasn't a smile of welcome. It felt like ownership. Will followed Diddy, assuming they were heading somewhere private to talk business. Instead, what he walked into would haunt him for years. "I thought it was going to be a conversation," he said, voice tight. "But what I saw, it shook me." Behind the closed door was a scene unlike anything he had expected. People, men, women, some faces he recognized from film and music, were performing. Others looked disturbingly young, and around them, a group of spectators watched like it was some twisted show. "And Diddy," Will said, pausing, his throat tightening. He was laughing, like it was the most normal thing in the world. He paused to collect himself. "I didn't know how to leave, and that's when I realized that was the point. Once you're in, you're in." The courtroom was silent as Will continued, his voice steady but hollow. "A few days after the party, I got a call. Blocked number. All the voice said was, 'Hope you had fun, Fresh Prince.' Then they hung up. thought it was just a weird prank, until an unmarked envelope showed up at his office. Inside was a flash drive. I almost didn't look, but I did. What he found was footage from that night, Will on a couch, clearly out of it, laughing at something he didn't even remember. I don't recall being that out of it, he admitted. But there I was. And behind the camera, there was a voice, Diddy's voice. He said, "That's how we keep him." Will swallowed hard. In that moment, I realized I wasn't invited to that party. I was initiated, and that, he said, is when the manipulation began. I started getting more invitations. I declined. Then, suddenly, roles I was in talks for vanished. People I had worked with for years stopped calling. Online rumors started about my sexuality, about my mental health, about cheating. I knew what it was. It was pressure. Diddy didn't have to threaten me. He didn't have to say anything. It was understood. Silence was the cost of peace. So, for years, Will stayed quiet. He smiled in interviews, ignored the whispers, buried himself in work. But every time he saw someone else speak out, Cassie, Danity Kane's Dawn Richard, even Meek Mill's name being dragged through the mud, he felt the weight of his own silence. "If they're speaking," he said, glancing around the courtroom, "why am I still quiet?" He turned to face the jury. Diddy didn't just ruin careers. He created a culture of fear around telling the truth. That, Will said, is what finally brought him to court. He leaned forward, his voice low but clear. It wasn't just that video. That was the leash. From that moment on, everything I did felt like there were strings attached. Will explained how subtle the control was, how it crept into every part of his career. Calls would come through my agent, invitations, projects. If I said no to something Diddy wanted, I'd find out the next week that a greenlit film wasn't greenlit anymore. This wasn't a one-time thing. It became a pattern. Diddy didn't need to make threats. He had systems, PR people, bloggers, producers. He knew who to call. He knew how to make problems appear out of thin air and how to make opportunities disappear just as fast. Will recounted one specific incident from 2013 when he had been lined up for a major international campaign with a top luxury fashion brand. We were in final negotiations. I had already shot the first lookbook. Everything was set. Then, out of nowhere, the brand dropped him. No explanation. Just gone. He paused, and I knew why. Weeks later, Will said, he was invited to another one of Diddy's events. He declined again. That's when the phone calls began, anonymous, persistent. Then the stories started to appear, strange, oddly specific rumors on gossip blogs. Things no one should have known. Things only someone with deep access could have planted. It was psychological warfare, Will told the courtroom. You start to question yourself. You feel paranoid, like you're imagining it all, but then the patterns reveal themselves. The punishments, the timing, and you realize you're not crazy. You're being boxed in. Will testified that he wasn't alone. He knew other celebrities enduring the same quiet torment. Some of them are sitting silent right now. Some of them are locked into contracts that won't let them speak. Some are just scared they'll be exposed the same way I was. He turned toward Diddy and said flatly, "You didn't just collect people. You controlled them. Everyone." In the courtroom understood exactly what he meant. But Will didn't stop there. He described how Diddy's influence wasn't limited to musicians. It extended deep into Hollywood's foundations. You couldn't step onto a major stage without brushing up against someone he helped put there. He recalled a 2016 charity gala where he saw it firsthand. Powerful figures from music, film, politics, and tech, all orbiting around Puff. They acted like he was the glue holding the entire room together. Will described watching a high-ranking executive from a major streaming platform hand Diddy a USB drive and whisper, "Only you have the final cut." Will never revealed what was on that drive, but he said the moment confirmed his worst fear. Diddy wasn't just networking, he was gatekeeping. He spoke of how he noticed other actors, rappers, and public figures behaving strangely around Diddy. Overly deferential, too eager to please, laughing too hard at every joke. I realized most of them weren't his friends. They were his survivors. Will confessed that for years he remained silent because he believed speaking out would destroy him. I thought I'd be blackballed forever. But the truth is, I already was. There was no official blacklist, just whispers. Quiet doubt, opportunities that suddenly disappeared, projects that mysteriously stalled. The only reason I stayed relevant, he said, was because the public wouldn't let me fade. That's what Puff couldn't control. The people. Over time, Will said. He started seeing things more clearly. He went back through old photos, event footage, interviews, realizing just how often Diddy's shadow loomed behind the scenes. If he wasn't in the room, his influence was. Then, Will said, came the moment that shattered everything. His voice dropped lower and more solemn. I stayed quiet for 20 years. I told myself it wasn't real, or at least that it wasn't happening to me. Then came the audio tapes. At first, I didn't believe it. I heard rumors that tapes were being played in court, secret recordings, and I thought, no way, that can't be real. But then the call came, not from the prosecution, not from a reporter, but from someone he once trusted. They said, "Will, you're on one of those tapes. They played it yesterday. People are talking." Will described the feeling like the ground had opened beneath him. "I didn't even know a tape like that existed," he said, visibly shaken. But the moment I accepted it might be real, everything else started to make sense. He stayed up all night replaying memories, the party, the blackout, the envelope, the voice on the tape. Will said the calls from blocked numbers, the whispers, the silence, it was all part of a system. And I was one of the victims, he told the courtroom. But his breaking point wasn't fear. It was humiliation. I realized that if I didn't speak now, my silence would become my legacy, he said. And I couldn't live with that. My kids are going to see these headlines. One day my grandkids might too. I had to speak. He reached out to the prosecution himself. I told them, "I'm ready. Whatever you need, whatever questions you have, I'll answer them." Looking directly at the jury, Will continued, "I wasn't just coerced. I was played. I was filmed. I was used." Then, turning to Diddy, his voice sharpened. "And you knew exactly what you were doing." He paused, closing his eyes, visibly bracing himself. When he spoke again, his tone was lower, heavier. When the prosecution asked if I wanted to hear the audio, I hesitated, he said. But I knew I had to. The playback happened behind closed doors. No jury, no press, just the judge, the lawyers, and Will. I heard myself laughing, he said slowly. But it wasn't real. It was hollow. I sounded drugged. He described the audio's background, slow, eerie music, faint voices, the occasional cheer or shout. Then came the moment he couldn't forget. I heard Diddy, clear as day, saying something like, "That's how we break them in." And then they said my name, while doing things I won't even repeat. His voice faltered. It wasn't just humiliating. It was horrifying. There's a difference between being embarrassed and being stripped of your humanity. That tape, it took something from me. Will's voice cracked for the first time. He looked down, took a breath, then continued. I never consented to being recorded. I never agreed to be a part of that. But Diddy recorded it. He kept it. Maybe to use, maybe just to have. He explained how for years he couldn't make sense of the sudden anxiety he'd feel at certain names. The panic attacks during interviews. Now, he said, he understood. I wasn't crazy. I was remembering something I didn't want to remember. Hearing the audio forced him to face it all. The manipulation, the grooming, the betrayal by people who stood by and watched. But what shook me the most, he said quietly, was what I didn't remember. He turned to the jury. "If you want to know how powerful Diddy is," he said, "ask yourself how someone like me could be silenced for 20 years and not even realize it." By the time Will's testimony reached the media, it was too late for Hollywood to run damage control. The clips went viral before the bailiff could even call the court back to order. Hashtags exploded across social media. Our Will Speaks, Freak Off Tape, Diddy Files. For the first time, the world saw Will not as a polished A-lister, but as a survivor. "I knew once I spoke, things would get ugly," he said, "but I didn't know how fast." Within 24 hours of testifying, 2 brand deals were pulled. A studio paused promotion for a film he had already completed, but Will didn't flinch. "It didn't matter," he said, "because I'd already lost something more valuable years ago. My voice." And then the calls started coming. Quiet ones, texts, DMs from actors, producers, directors. Some of them, he said, were ready to talk.